Today, Sydney is known for its glittering harbor and iconic landmarks. But 200 years ago, it began as something very different, a remote British prison camp. This is the incredible true story of how Sydney transformed from a brutal convict colony to one of the world's most livable cities. Welcome to the complete history of Sydney. Whispers of the First Sun, the ancient heart of Sydney. Long before ships with white sails ever cut across the horizon, Sydney pulsed with the sacred rhythms of the first Australians, whose roots in this land stretch back more than 45,000 years, a lineage as old as time itself. From the riverbanks of Parramatta to the deep shadows of the Blue Mountains, thousands of Aboriginal people thrived, their lives woven into the land through fishing, hunting, and a deep spiritual bond with nature. They danced beneath starlit skies, sang stories of ancestral beings, and marked time with sacred ceremonies that united clans, forged alliances, and honored the ancient law of dreaming. The Eora, Darug, and Darawal people spoke in diverse tongues and adorned themselves with unique styles, but all shared a reverence for the spirits that shaped their world. Then, on April 29th, 1770, the stillness of the ages shattered as Lieutenant James Cook stepped ashore at Botany Bay, where he was met not with welcome, but with resistance. Two Gadigal warriors, guardians of their sacred land, stood firm against the intruders. A gunshot rang out, echoing across the waters and marking the beginning of a cataclysmic change. Cook's brief stay yielded no bonds with the land's custodians, only specimens and sorrow. Yet, beneath the paved streets and soaring skyline of modern Sydney, the whispers of this ancient world endure, a story not lost, but waiting to be heard. Chains in the Cove, Sydney's birth in fire and iron. In the summer of 1788, as Britain's empire reeled from the loss of its American colonies, it cast its eyes upon a remote and ancient land, terra incognita, at the edge of the world. Into the wild coves of Australia came the first fleet, 11 ships laden not with adventurers, but with 736 convicts, exiled souls bound in chains and shame. Led by Captain Arthur Phillip, they arrived at Botany Bay, only to find it unsuitable, until they laid eyes on the jewel of Port Jackson, which Phillip would call the finest harbor in the world. There, on January 26th, a ragged settlement was born on the shores of Sydney Cove, a name now etched in history. But this was no paradise. It was a land of desolation and despair. Starvation loomed as crops withered in unyielding soil, and the dream of a self-sufficient penal colony cracked beneath the sun. The second and third fleets brought life-saving supplies, and as ex-convicts claimed land, green fields eventually stretched toward Parramatta and Camden. Yet the birth of Sydney came with a terrible price. In April 1789, smallpox swept through the Aboriginal clans, extinguishing half their number in a silent apocalypse. And yet, from the ashes, resilience stirred. Penal, a survivor, would walk into the heart of the settlement and stake a presence for his people that endures to this day. Urban plans were drawn, but never followed. Sydney grew wild, without order or symmetry, a chaotic sprawl born not of design, but of desperation and grit. And so, amidst hunger, death, and reluctant hope, a city rose, not merely from stone, but from suffering and survival, forged in the fire of empire and tempered by the will to endure. From rebellion to renaissance, Sydney's rise from the shackles. After Governor Phillip sailed away in 1792, a new power quietly rose in the dusty streets of Sydney. Not from royal decree, but from ex-convict soldiers and settlers staking claims, trading goods, and building homes on Crown land, often without permission. The fragile order gave way to a raw, untamed spirit. Sydney town was no longer a penal colony, but a living, breathing frontier society. But power breeds conflict, and when Governor William Bligh dared to crack down on corruption and curb illicit trade, he was met not with compliance, but mutiny. In 1808, the infamous Rum Rebellion erupted, and Bligh was overthrown by the New South Wales Corps, the only successful military coup in Australia's history. Into the chaos stepped Governor Lachlan Macquarie, whose vision and resolve would transform a scattered settlement into the foundations of a city. Macquarie dreamed in stone and structure. He forged roads through wilderness, raised churches on muddy streets, and opened Parramatta Road and the route over the Blue Mountains, pushing the colony's frontier into the vast heart of the continent. Under his leadership, Sydney found its rhythm, a currency, a bank, a layout, and a sense of purpose. As the chains of transportation began to break, waves of free settlers surged in, bringing ambition, culture, and complexity. Between 1826 and 1840, Sydney swelled with tens of thousands of new arrivals. Its society split between working-class neighborhoods like the Rocks and the stately homes of the East. Convicts became merchants. Settlers became citizens, and the call for self-rule echoed louder through the streets. By 1840, with the end of convict transportation, the city shed its penal past and looked to the future, a fierce, flawed, and extraordinary transformation from colonial outpost to a city of ambition and defiance. From gold rush to grand ambition, Sydney's gilded struggle. As the sun rose on the 1840s, Sydney transformed from a convict port into a colonial capital, newly christened a city in 1842, with its own council and a semi-elected legislature, a bold step toward self-governance, albeit wrapped in the tight corset of a property-based vote. But just as this young city began to find its stride, gold fever gripped the land in 1851, sending its workforce rushing to distant diggings and plunging Sydney into uncertainty. For a moment, it seemed Melbourne would steal Sydney's crown, eclipsing it in size and swagger, sparking a fierce and enduring rivalry. Yet, Sydney endured and even thrived, buoyed by immigration, gold wealth, and grand visions. The city's pulse quickened as sandstone masterpieces rose. The majestic University of Sydney, the refined town hall, and the ornate General Post Office, their golden facades glowing in the colonial sunlight. Terrace houses stacked tightly along narrow lanes, while elegant hotels and coffee palaces hinted at aspirations of European sophistication. Beneath the grandeur, however, daily life remained rigid. Daylight sea bathing was banned, and even freedom in the surf was regulated. Yet as quickly as fortune had bloomed, the 1890s brought it to its knees. Droughts withered the land, government spending slowed, and a brutal financial crisis crushed livelihoods. Sydney staggered under the weight of dashed dreams. Even as one of its own, Premier George Reed helped chart a path toward unity and a new national destiny. Through boom and bust, ambition and adversity, Sydney carved its identity, not just as a city of sandstone and spires, but as a symbol of resilience, pride, and the promise of a nation yet to be born. From ashes and glory, Sydney's rise in the modern age. As the curtain rose on the 20th century, Sydney stepped into its role as the proud capital of New South Wales, shaped by tragedy, war, vision, and defiance. The shadow of bubonic plague in 1900 jolted the city into a new era of slum clearances and wharf revitalization. Then came World War I, where Sydney-siders marched by the thousands to enlist, more than the Commonwealth could even process, bringing a grim end to joblessness but casting a heavy toll. The returning soldiers were promised homes fit for heroes, and from that promise, the dreamlike suburbs of Daceyville and Matreville began to bloom. Garden suburbs unfurled along the expanding tram and rail lines as the city passed the million mark in 1926, reclaiming its title as Australia's most populous city. But just as Sydney reached for the sky, the Great Depression pulled it to its knees. With male unemployment peaking at 28%, entire families were tossed from their homes, and the hills around Botany Bay echoed with the makeshift shanty towns of the desperate. One, called Happy Valley, bore a name steeped in cruel irony. Political unrest stirred with the winds of hardship in 1932 as the Sydney Harbour Bridge, an icon of engineering pride, awaited its ceremonial opening. A saber-wielding member of the far-right New Guard stormed the stage and stole the moment, slicing through the ribbon in a rebellious act that defined a divided era. In 1938, Sydney sparkled for the Empire Games and its 150th anniversary, dazzling journalists with sun-kissed beaches and terrace villas. Yet, in solemn contrast, Aboriginal Australians declared a day of mourning, grieving the loss that European colonization brought to their people. And then, as World War II erupted, Sydney once again became a city of industry, resilience, and vigilance. Women filled the factories. Submarines prowled at Harbour, and the threat of attack turned parks into drill grounds, homes into bunkers. The city's soul was forged anew in fire and steel, its skyline rising, its people tested, and its story etched into the very bones of a nation born from contradiction, courage, and change. A city reborn, Sydney's journey through boom, battles, and becoming. In the hush after World War II, Sydney burst to life in a symphony of prams and possibility. New families bloomed, fed by the twin fires of a baby boom and a tidal wave of immigration. From the soot of Europe and the hard Britain came those seeking hope, and together they reshaped the city's pulse. Suburbs unfurled like a living map across the Cumberland Plain, stretching wide with dreams of backyards and barbecues in places like Green Valley and Mount Druitt, as former townships like Parramatta and Liverpool merged into the growing metropolis. Factories roared, steel pressed, and for a while, manufacturing wore the crown of employment. But Sydney, ever-changing, began to hum with a new rhythm, retail, services, and a modern urban heartbeat. In 1954, Queen Elizabeth II touched down on the very soil where Captain Phillip had once raised a flag, and over 1 million Sydneysiders lined the shores to witness the moment, a monarch stepping onto Australian earth for the first time. Yet beneath the grandeur, tension stirred. As glass towers clawed at the sky, voices rose from the ground. Unionists and residents fought for heritage, for soul, laying down green bands that protected historic pockets like the rocks. In that battle for identity, the now iconic Sydney Opera House was born, bruised by political fights, but destined to become a global symbol. As the decades turned, the world came to Sydney, from Vietnam, Lebanon, China, India, and beyond, reshaping the city's face, its food, its festivals. By 2021, Sydney was no longer just a city. It was a kaleidoscope, home to over 5.2 million people, with 40% born on distant shores. No longer simply British in legacy, Sydney had become a story of the world, where ancient rituals, colonial scars, and multicultural dreams collided to create a city as bold, defiant, and dazzling as the sails that crown at Harbour. From its painful beginnings to its stunning modern skyline, Sydney's story is one of remarkable transformation. If you enjoyed this journey through time, hit like, subscribe, and tell us, what Australian city should we explore next? Thanks for watching History Love.